All right, everybody, it's 9:31, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I will be covering Fiscal Year 2027 District Eligibility Requirements for the Impaired Impacted Streams Initiative Program. I mentioned this a little bit a while ago, but couple housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and posted to the IISI website later. Please do stay on mute when you're not actively asking a question. So if you call in, you can mute and unmute yourself by pressing *6. Otherwise, on a computer, you have your little microphone button. And if you do have a burning question, you're welcome to come off mute and ask that when I'm covering that item. But if you can save it towards the end, that would be awesome, just in case I do cover it in some of the additional slides that I plan to present on. So let's go ahead and start diving in here. The Impaired Impacted Streams Initiative, known as the IISI, is a sub-program of the Agriculture Cost Share Program. It's designed to promote targeted agricultural practice implementation to address water quality deterioration and documented impairments resulting from or exacerbated by non-point source pollution from agricultural lands. Even if your district does not have a water body that is officially listed as impaired on the state's 303D list, you're still able to participate in the IISI if you can document that there's another water in your district's area that is having water quality concerns due to agricultural non-point source pollution, and you can document those concerns in your IISI survey. We call those water bodies impacted waters, and districts that have impaired waters or impacted waters are equally eligible to participate in the IISI. There are special funds known as Impaired Impacted Funds, or II funds, that are available to districts that participate in the IISI program, and the Soil and Water Conservation Commission annually earmarks these funds from the Ag Cost Share program. So that's kind of how this program operates. If you're interested in learning more about the background of the IISI, you're more than welcome to contact me, Eligibility, and we can talk through that. So before I get into the specifics, I just want to mention that there's not any new requirements this year for IISI participation. It's the same requirements that have been in place for the last couple of fiscal years. So I just wanted to highlight that for anybody that was curious. This slide is summarizing all of the district eligibility requirements for participation in the program. So eligibility to participate in the IISI means that your district can receive those specially earmarked ACSP funds, the II funds, to fund conservation work on agricultural lands in your county. So the eligibility requirements are listed on the slide. So the first is to complete an IISI survey for each HUC 12 watershed where II funds will be used. So in this survey, you'll specify water bodies that are impaired or that are impacted by agricultural non-point source pollution. And you'll prioritize ACSP BMP implementation in those watersheds. You can prioritize up to 3 HUC 12 watersheds within each fiscal year with IISI surveys to use those II funds within. The second requirement is to confirm that there are outstanding ag cost share funding requests in the priority watersheds that you've specified. So those up to 3 HUC 12 watersheds by early June. The third is to call out priority II watersheds by name and their 12-digit hydrologic unit codes in your fiscal year 2027 ACSP ranking form and assign points in that ranking form to those watersheds so that BMP implementation in those watersheds is prioritized. The fourth is to demonstrate high utilization of previous year II allocations through funding concurrence to contracts or mid-year voluntary returns. So for districts that have been participating for the last couple of years, every year when we look at making allocations in July, we look back at what your district has been able to utilize from your II allocation, and to determine that utilization percentage, we use we look at either the encumbrance totals by fiscal year end or the mid-year voluntary returns of funds. So we combine those numbers, and if you are reaching at least 85% of your utilization, if you've received 2 II allocations in the last 2 fiscal years, then you've met this parameter. If you've received only 1 II allocation, you just have to meet a 70% utilization. And if you haven't received any II allocation in the last couple of years, this criteria doesn't apply and you can participate in the program and request funds. Then the last step is to request an amount of II funds for fiscal year 2027. So I hope that that's clear, but we'll go ahead and get into the details of each of these items in the next few slides. So the first eligibility requirement that we talked about was to complete an IISI survey for each HUC 12 watershed in which you plan to use II funds in for fiscal year 2027. So surveys submitted and approved in the last couple of years are still active. They remain active for 5 years. Please check the Division of Soil and Water Conservation's active survey list that's posted on the IISI website if you'd like to confirm approved surveys. If you do not have an IISI survey submitted for a watershed in your county, or you'd like to prioritize a different HUC 12 watershed in fiscal year 2027, the IISI survey is live on the division's website and it's due April 17th. So this is the list of the approved IISI surveys that you can find on the division's website. So I'm essentially just displaying here where you can find this list in the upcoming program year's instructions tab on the IISI website. You go to step 2 and you can see the approved list links, and that list shows each survey, each watershed that you've submitted, the year that it became active, and the year that it will expire. You can also find this document under the Material and Resources tab as well. It's a little bit buried within there, but which is why I've linked it in the upcoming program years instructions tab, just so it's a little bit easier to find. But you can find it here as well, and it is a list of the approved surveys. So there's lots of materials and resources. I will say too, if you don't want to try and find it within the website, if it's a little bit confusing to remember where to locate it, you can just Google IISI approved surveys list, and it should be like one of the first couple links that pops up. All right, so just getting us back to the that eligibility requirement, that first one, again, it is due, the survey is due April 17th. There's about 21 questions in total. A lot of data and materials that are required to be, a lot of data and materials that you need to consult in order to fill that survey out are linked. And there's also additional resources that are available on the IISI webpage that you can utilize as well. So I am going to really quickly pull up the IISI website just to demo some of these things for folks that are interested. So this is the website. You'll notice that the first link that you see once you get there is the survey link. So if you click that, it will automatically take you to the survey, and a lot of things in the survey are linked already. But if you want to kind of go back to the website, you can certainly kind of dive in. So history obviously covers background about the program. Deadlines is important things to do by certain dates. Upcoming program year instructions is essentially that list of eligibility requirements that I went through to summarize on the first couple slides of this presentation today. And it really walks you through each step that you need to meet in order to participate in the IISI. Again, the approved list of IISI surveys that you can consult to determine when the survey became active and when it will expire is linked in there, as are some other useful resources. The other things I wanted to highlight for you is that the recording from today will be posted here. So you'll see that I had a similar recording from last year that I had posted that is currently viewable. So I'll just update it for fiscal year 27 here. And survey tutorial videos are available. So these are videos that I prepared to help districts understand what this survey is asking for and how to interpret the questions and how to find answers to the questions based on reviewing different data sources that are available. So we have additional program links that will take you to all the different resources that are linked in the survey. And that might be just useful information for you to consult when you're thinking about participation in the IISI. And we have those linked in both this materials and resources tab, as well as resource links for survey completion. So that's just an overview of the resources that we have available as well. You'll also, I just want to really quickly point out this web map, which is it's essentially a map of all of the currently active prioritized IISI watersheds each year. So these are the up to 3 watersheds that districts have specified for fiscal year 2026 that they are planning to use II funds within. You can view a larger version of the map by clicking that link there. This same map, like the same stuff in here, is also included in your Map It tool in CS2. So every year we update the IISI watersheds in the CS2 Map It tool with the watersheds that you've prioritized in your strategic plan and in your local ranking forms for II fund implementation. So just be aware that we're trying to make this easier for districts by having these like mapping resources available, so you don't have to just like look at a list and then go to another map to try and figure out which watershed it is. So, all right, moving on here. I'll minimize this. The next eligibility requirement, we're getting into the next step, is to prioritize ACSP BMP implementation in those up to 3 Huck-12 scale watersheds with IISI surveys that your district has prioritized for the fiscal year. So you complete this prioritization through your strategic plan submittal. So a screenshot of the questions that are asked in the strategic plan are included on the slide. And this prioritization also needs to be completed in your local ACSP ranking form as well, but we will cover a little bit more on that later since that is one of the items that typically gets a lot of questions from districts. The next requirement is to confirm that there are outstanding ag cost share funding requests, either CS or II funding requests in your priority watersheds by June 1st of each fiscal year. So again, this is completed in your strategic plan submittal due June 1, and a screenshot of the question that's included in that strategic plan form is added on the slide. I always get a couple of questions on how this is determined every year. So that's what we're going to kind of go over next. So how do you determine outstanding CS or II fund requests in your watersheds, ag cost share fund requests in your watersheds? Really, the recommendations that I give is if you have any active applications or a watershed planned project list, that's the most surefire way to confirm that you have outstanding requests in those watersheds. You can also make this like confirmation based on expected funding requests or verbal conversations that you have with landowners or farmers that you're expecting will kind of come in the next fiscal year to request funding for BMP implementation. If you've provided or plan to provide a significant level of technical assistance in the watersheds, and you're sure that some of those visits will turn into BMP funding requests, that's also a good option. And I do know that we have a number of new staff as well in our offices who may not have that sort of background information, depending on who was in the position before you and how long the vacancy was. So in that case, I would consult with any other staff that have been with the office for any longer than you. And also just review what your district's II allocation and contract encumbrance history was in the past. So we can always run reports for you from CS2 to show what has been allocated and contracted in the past to help you with making that request. We do encourage you to have more than just like what you typically do in a year, like base it on some conversations that you have with people or active applications, those sorts of things. But if you don't have any of that information and you're really new and the strategic plan is due tomorrow, this is an appropriate way to kind of handle that, just so your district doesn't miss out on this funding opportunity. So I always also get questions as to like why this question is required and why are staff being asked to confirm if they have active ACSP funding requests and prioritized IISI watersheds. And really just for the sake of keeping it brief, this is just meant to be a due diligence step to ensure that these earmarked funds are moving toward their intended purpose instead of being reserved for in case requests that might come in. So we were seeing about a 30% annual rollover in II funds in the previous decade. And so this was implemented to try and prevent that just reserving these funds in case that a request comes in. We ask that you try and answer this question as honestly as you can in the strategic plan and to the best of your ability so that we can continue to improve our program's fund utilization so we don't have that big rollover. All right, the next eligibility requirement is to call out the up to 3 priority II watersheds by name and their 12-digit hydrologic unit codes in your local ACSP ranking form. You'll need to affirm in the strategic plan submittal due June 1 that your ACSP ranking form calls out watersheds by name and by 12-digit code in before you submit. So this is, again, a question that is asked in the strategic plan submittal. But how is this achieved? How can you answer yes to this question? So again, this is something that I usually get some districts ask questions about every year. So I want to kind of go into this in a little bit more detail. So this is, I'm just going to walk through what II watershed criteria is in ACSP ranking forms. And this criteria, as I previously shared, is intended to really clearly delineate what watershed is receiving certain points, extra points for participation in the program. So you'll need to specify the watershed name and the 12-digit HUC, hydrologic unit code. The reason for that is that the code is the clearest way to describe the II watershed location and extent, and it's particularly useful for division staff or new staff or board members or any members of the public who might want to view your ranking sheets and your projects to determine why certain projects got points and others didn't. We also, for this criteria, require that districts assign points in a manner that prioritizes funding ACSP BMP implementation in II watersheds. So the points need to be put into your ranking form in some manner to give some level of prioritization to specific areas in your county for the purposes of restoration, such that the funding that you're getting, the extra funding that you're getting is going towards targeted work for restoration work. And then we ask, like you would do normally with your district ranking form approval, get your board to review the criteria, approve it. You don't have to list II criteria or II watersheds in your AgRep or CCAP ranking forms. Again, this is intended for targeted restoration to address agricultural non-point source pollution. So if you're updating your AgRAP form, which is intended to be a water conservation program, the II criteria might not really align with what your district's priorities are for that program, right? Because II watersheds are intended to be in need of restoration work, not necessarily water conservation work, right? Similarly for CCAP, although that is also a water quality program that is focused on urban sources, not necessarily agricultural sources. So you don't necessarily have to add II watersheds into your CCAP or your AgRAP forms unless there's some reason why you would want to focus, you know, implementation of those programs in those watersheds as well. All right, so I wanted to go through some examples of II criteria and ACSP ranking forms. The first example shows II criteria added to an ACSP ranking form that meets policy. So in this criteria, it's very clear that there's a watershed location and extent specified. The name for the watershed and the hydrologic unit code is listed. There's points assigned, and ag cost share implementation is being prioritized in the watersheds for targeted restoration work. So this type of criteria in your ranking form, it would meet policy. This is also another example of criteria in a ranking form that would meet policy. So even though it's a generic statement here, located in an improved, impaired, and impacted watershed, refer to map, it also includes a map that specifies the name of that watershed and the HUC of that watershed very clearly. And so you would know if you're looking at this ranking form, okay, if a project is located in this watershed that is mapped and included in this ranking form, then it'll get these, the number of points that are specified. Additionally, the number of points that are assigned here, it's clearly prioritizing ACSP BMP implementation in an II watershed over some other types of locations in the county. So that's another example of a watershed meeting policy. And lastly, I wanted to include this example because you'll notice that this impaired impacted watershed has less points than another watershed in the county has been assigned with outstanding resource waters. So normally you might say, okay, well, this is definitely specifying watershed location and extent very clearly, but the points are not necessarily prioritizing BMP restoration work because you're giving more points towards BMP implementation and this outstanding resource watershed area. So that is true, but it's okay to prioritize ACSP BMP implementation in watersheds with high quality or outstanding resource waters at a higher level than prioritizing BMP implementation in II watershed if that's your district's priority. So some districts want to maintain really high water quality in waters that already have good water quality before they expend funds to try and fix water quality and impaired or degraded waters. So it's okay to kind of have that difference in priority within your district and for your district board to have that difference in priority. You can still meet policy by doing it that way. But you do need to be very clear in assigning some level of prioritization to restoration work happening in the county. And you do need to be very clear with the watershed location and extent as well. All right, so we're going to jump into some examples that don't meet IISI policy in ranking forms that I've reviewed in the last couple of years. So in some forms, I've seen kind of a generic statement that's like a priority watershed gets 25 points. But what is a priority watershed? It doesn't list the location, the extent is unclear. To fix this, I would request that a district add either a map or add the watershed name and 12-digit HUC to clarify what this statement means in your ranking form. This does assign points in BMP implementation, assign points to prioritize ACSP BMP implementation in the II watersheds. So that's a good thing. That is meeting policy, but the watershed location and extent is unclear. Another example is they do specify watershed name and HUC digit, HUC 12-digit code here. And they do assign points, but you'll also notice that they have also assigned points to all other watersheds in their county. So this is not necessarily giving priority points to any particular watershed over the others. So in this situation, and depending on how you structure your ranking form, you know, you would this likely wouldn't pass muster with meeting IISI policy if you're prioritizing all projects the same in your county. Additionally, in this example, they just give a watershed name, but they don't specify a 12-digit HUC. And I have included a map of like what the Turnbull Creek watershed could look like. These are each 12-digit hydrologic unit code watersheds within that Turnbull Creek overall watershed. So is this, you know, is all of the Turnbull Creek watershed eligible for points? If it is, then that doesn't meet policy because you know, there's more than 3 HUC 12 watersheds that are located in this overall larger watershed. So that is prioritizing II implementation in more than 3 HUC 12 watersheds in a given fiscal year. So really, again, the 12-digit hydrologic unit codes is just the clearest way to define like what watershed extent, like how big is your watershed, where are you prioritizing your funds. And so either add a map or add a 12-digit code to this criteria that would fix this. That would fix this situation. All right. So at any point, you can contact me to review fiscal year 27 ACSP ranking forms if you would like me to confirm that your district form meets IISI policy before you present it to your board for approval in April or May. If you're currently participating in the IISI program, you're not making any changes. And by currently participating, I mean you received an II allocation this year in some manner. You likely have a form that is currently meeting IISI policy, so you don't need to make any updates to your form unless you want to change something by submitting a new IISI survey, prioritizing a different HUC, those sorts of things in your form this year. But at any point, you're more than welcome to email me your ranking forms. I'll look them over, and I'm happy to confirm that this looks good or provide suggestions. And I have run into a couple situations that districts have chosen not to participate in the IISI for one fiscal year. And so they just get rid of their II criteria, like they're not pursuing a July allocation. So they just remove the II criteria in the ranking form. I would discourage you from doing that if you think that you might get a request to come in mid-year, that you could potentially ask for II funds in the spring to cover. So if you take out your II criteria at your ranking form at the start of the fiscal year, you're not able to ask for those mid-year funds because you won't be eligible to receive an II allocation in the spring. So if you just leave your II criteria in your form for the whole fiscal year, even if you're not meeting criteria to receive an allocation in July, you might get a request to come in later down the road, and you could request II funds in the spring. So just keep your criteria in unless your board really wants to remove it, or you're not planning to participate in the IISI program in the very near future, like in the next 3 to 5 years, then go ahead, and remove it. But yeah, I would just encourage you to continue making things easier and potentially keeping yourself eligible to receive all different types of funding if you have eligibility to participate in those different funding opportunities in the mid-year voluntary return process in the spring or the regular allocation process in July. All right, so the last eligibility requirement is the high utilization of previous year II allocations, either through encumbrance totals by fiscal year end or mid-year voluntary return of funds prior to spring supplemental allocations. So districts that have been receiving II allocations consistently for the last couple fiscal years have to meet an 85% utilization. Districts that receive just one allocation in the last 2 years have to meet a 70% threshold of utilization, and districts that haven't received an II allocation in the last 2 years don't have to meet this criteria. So you can go ahead and request II funds. If you meet all the other eligibility requirements, you'll get an allocation in July. So I've just included this formula so you can kind of see how this II utilization percentage is calculated. So we essentially sum up the total amount of II funds that you've encumbered to contracts by fiscal year end for fiscal year 25 or 26, as well as any II funds that you returned mid-year in fiscal year 25 and 26 for reallocation to other districts in the spring. And then we divide it by what was what was allocated to your district at the start of July, or over the full course of the fiscal year for fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26. So if you're meeting an 85% threshold, but if you follow this formula and you calculate it out and you're meeting 85% threshold, then you've met this criteria if you've received allocations in the last 2 years, 70% if you just received one. All right. The last eligibility requirement is to request an amount of II funds for fiscal year 27. So please base the number on the number of outstanding CS or II funding requests that you have in II priority watersheds that you're aware of, as well as just the reasonability of staff capacity to encumber those requests to contracts. Sometimes we get like $1 million or something in like strategic plan submittals, which is great. You might have a lot of need, but if you can't reasonably encumber $1 million in the next fiscal year to contracts because you have one staff person in your district, then it might be appropriate to include a smaller number there. And we also only get $500,000 of II funds per year, so that's not really reasonable to request for this particular program, although it might be more reasonable-ish to request your cost share. All right. We covered a lot of details. I covered a lot of examples, so I'm just going to reiterate again the summary slide that I covered at the very start with all of the district eligibility requirements. The first is to complete an IISI survey for each HUC 12 watershed where II funds will be used. Second is to prioritize ACSP BMP implementation and the up to 3 HUC 12 watersheds with II surveys each fiscal years. Confirm that you have outstanding requests in those watersheds by your strategic plan submittal deadline. Call out your II watersheds by name and their 12-digit hydrologic unit codes and assign points so that it's prioritizing ACSP BMP implementation for the purposes of restoration in those watersheds. Within your ranking form, demonstrate high utilization of previous year allocations and request II funds by fiscal year 27. So end of year reminders, again, we have a deadline coming up. April 17th is the deadline to send in new IISI watershed surveys to the Division of Soil and Water Conservation if you want to, prioritize a different watershed this year if you've been participating in the program, or get engaged with the program if you're new to it. This is the deadline to meet. In April or May board meetings, you'll need to present an ACSP ranking form that has II criteria included to your board for approval. Then June 1, we have the strategic plan deadline. And again, in there is a number of IISI related items. So just completing all those questions in there, uploading your ranking form with the II specific criteria in it, requesting how much II funds you want for the upcoming fiscal year. And then in June, if I request it, I follow up with your district, please make corrections to your ranking form to meet policy and present any updated form to your board for approval. I'll try to, so the earlier you send in your strategic plans and the earlier that I can review ranking forms and all the IISI items in your strategic plans, the faster that I can do a turnaround and let you know if your ranking form is not meeting IISI policy criteria. If you can submit it before June 1, just in case your board does need to meet in June, to revise your form for some other reason, then you have that capacity to do so if I'm able to kind of review it earlier. Hopefully we don't get in a situation. I feel like a lot of districts at this point are aware of the ranking form criteria and we covered a lot of details on it today. So hope we don't run into that situation, but that is available to us and to you, to districts, to make corrections in June before July allocations, if those need to be done after strategic plan submittals. You have until June 30th to encumber any II funds that you have remaining from your allocations this year to contracts to meet the utilization parameters. So again, 85% threshold for those receiving 2 allocations in the last 2 fiscal years, 70% for 1 allocation, and you don't have to meet this if you haven't received an allocation in the last 2 years. And where will the recording of this webinar be posted? Again, I will be posting this to the IISI website under the IISI Eligibility Requirements video tab. So you can find a link to that there once I have a chance to, edit this out and get it uploaded to YouTube. So any questions?